What are you eating that is damaging your brain? Of all of the different parts of the body, the brain is the most vulnerable to the detrimental effects of a poor diet. Some foods will make your memory and mood worse and increase the likelihood of developing dementia, so should be avoided at all costs. I share the 7 worst foods for your brain to cut out of your diet immediately and keep your brain working in optimum condition. Let's discuss. Welcome to episode 102 of Better Brain, Better You. Hello, I'm neuroscientist Dr. Ben Webb, sharing brain advice for a mentally healthy and happy life. Hey, how are you doing? I hope you're having a great day, and thanks so much for joining me for today's episode on the 7 worst foods for your brain. So before we discuss the foods that are bad for brain health, I want to give you a free guide that gives you the 20 best foods to eat for your brain health. These nutrient-dense foods will give a boost to your memory, mood, and thinking. You can download this free brain healthy food guide at ologyonlinecourses.com/brain foods. That's ologyonlinecourses.com/brain foods. If you download it today, I will also include a free tasty recipe from my brain healthy cookbook. Enjoy. So your brain is the most metabolically hungry organ in your body. That's why it's so essential to keep your brain working in optimal condition with a healthy diet. Some foods have negative effects on the brain, impacting your memory and mood, and increasing your risk of dementia. There are 55 million people currently living with dementia worldwide, and this number, sadly, is predicted to treble to 150 million by 2050. But luckily, you can reduce your risk of ever getting Alzheimer's disease and dementia by changing your diet and lifestyle. And a really good place to start is cutting certain foods out of your diet that are really bad for your brain. So I'm going to share the 7 worst foods for your brain to help you move towards a brain healthy diet. So first, sugary drinks. So sugary drinks like pop, sodas, sports drinks, energy drinks and fruit juice. So a high intake of sugary drinks not only expands your waistline and boosts your risks of type 2 diabetes and heart disease, it also has a really negative effect on your brain. So an excessive intake of sugary drinks increases the odds of developing type 2 diabetes, which has been shown to increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease. And higher sugar levels in the blood can also increase the risk of dementia, even in people without diabetes. So a primary component of many sugary drinks is high fructose corn syrup, HCFS, which consists of 55% fructose and 45% glucose. Now, high intake of fructose can lead to obesity, high blood pressure, high blood fats, diabetes, and arterial dysfunction. So these aspects of metabolic syndrome may lead to an increase in the long-term risk of developing dementia. And studies have shown that a high fructose intake can lead to insulin resistance in the brain, as well as a reduction in brain function, memory, learning, and the formation of new brain cells. So in one study in rats actually found that a diet high in sugar increased brain inflammation and impaired memory. And another study found that animals fed on a high fructose diet gained more weight, had worse blood sugar control, and a higher risk of metabolic disorders and memory impairments. So the results suggest that a high intake of fructose from sugary drinks may have additional negative effects on the brain, just beyond the effects of sugar. So some alternatives to sugary drinks include water, which is actually the most brain healthy drink, green tea, and vegetable juice. So second on our list are refined carbohydrates, or simple carbs. These include sugars and highly processed grains such as white flour. So these types of carbs generally have a high glycemic index. So this means your body digests them quickly, causing a spike in your blood sugar and insulin levels. And also, when eaten in larger quantities, these foods often have a high glycemic load as well. And the glycemic load refers to how much a food raises your blood sugar levels based on the serving size. So foods that have a high glycemic index and high glycemic load have been found to impair brain function. And research has shown that just a single meal with a high glycemic load can impair memory in both children and adults. Another study in healthy university students found that those who had a high intake of fat and refined sugar also had poorer memory. So this effect on memory may be due to inflammation of the hippocampus, that's the part of the brain involved in learning and memory, as well as responsiveness to hunger and fullness cues. So inflammation is recognised as a risk factor for degenerative diseases of the brain, including Alzheimer's disease and dementia. So for example, one study looked at elderly people who had consumed more than 58% of their daily calories in the form of carbohydrates. And the study found they had almost double the risk of mild mental impairment and dementia. And healthy, lower glycemic index carbs include foods like vegetables, fruits, legumes, and whole grains. So third is foods high in trans fats. So trans fats are a type of unsaturated fat that can have a detrimental effect on brain health. Trans fats occur naturally in animal products like meat and dairy and are not great for the brain. But industrially produced trans fats, also known as hydrogenated vegetable oils, are a major problem for brain health. These artificial trans fats can be found in shortening, margarine, frosting, snack foods, ready-made cakes and pre-packaged biscuits. And studies have found that when people consume higher amounts of trans fats, they tend to have an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease, poorer memory, lower brain volume, and cognitive decline. So trans fats have a negative effect on many other aspects of health, including heart health and inflammation. And there's also a positive association between saturated fat intake and the risk of Alzheimer's disease. But diets high in omega-3 fatty acids have actually been found to help protect against cognitive decline. So omega-3s increase the secretion of anti-inflammatory compounds in the brain and can actually have a protective effect, especially in older adults. So you can increase the amount of omega-3 in your diet by eating foods like fatty fish, wild-caught salmon, chia seeds, flax seeds, and walnuts. So fourth are highly processed foods. So highly processed foods tend to be high in sugar, added fats, and salt. So they include foods like crisps, sweets, instant noodles, microwave popcorn, shop-bought sauces, and ready-made meals. So these foods are usually high in calories and low in other nutrients, and they're exactly the kind of foods that cause weight gain, which can have a negative effect on your brain health. So a study in 243 people found increased fat around the organs, or what we call visceral fat, is associated with brain tissue damage. Another study in 130 people found there's a measurable decrease in brain tissue even in the early stages of metabolic syndrome. So the nutrient composition of processed foods in the Western diet can also negatively affect the brain and contribute to the development of degenerative diseases. So a study including 52 people found that a diet high in unhealthy ingredients resulted in lower levels of sugar metabolism in the brain and a decrease in brain tissue. These factors are thought to be markers for Alzheimer's disease. One of the ways processed foods may negatively impact the brain is by reducing the production of a molecule called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF for short. This molecule is found in various parts of the brain, including the hippocampus, and it's important for long-term memory learning and the growth of new neurons as well. So therefore, any reduction can have a negative impact on these functions. So you can avoid processed foods by eating mostly fresh, whole foods such as fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, meat, and fish. So fifth is aspartame. Aspartame is an artificial sweetener used in many sugar-free products. People often choose to use it when trying to lose weight or avoid sugar when they have diabetes. It's also found in many commercial products not specifically targeted at people with diabetes. However, this widely used sweetener has also been linked to behavioural and cognitive problems, though this research has been controversial. Some scientists have suggested that it may cause negative effects on learning and emotions, which have been observed when aspartame is consumed in excess. One study looked at the effects of high aspartame diet and found participants were more irritable, had a higher rate of depression, and performed worse on cognitive tests. And another study found people who consumed artificially sweetened soft drinks had an increased risk of stroke and dementia. So cutting out artificial sweeteners and excess sugar from your diet altogether is one really effective way to look after your brain health. So sixth is alcohol. So excessive consumption of alcohol can have damaging effects on the brain. Chronic alcohol use results in a reduction in brain volume, metabolic changes, and disruption of neurotransmitters, which are chemicals the brain uses to communicate. So people with alcoholism often have a deficiency in vitamin B1, and this can lead to a brain disorder called Wernicke's encephalopathy, which in turn can develop into Korsakoff syndrome. And this syndrome is characterized by severe brain shrinkage, memory loss, disturbances in eyesight, confusion, and unsteadiness. And excessive consumption of alcohol can also have negative effects in non-alcoholics. So binge drinking can cause the brain to interpret emotional cues differently than normal. So for example, people have a reduced sensitivity to sad faces and an increased sensitivity to angry faces. And it's thought that these changes to emotion recognition may actually be a cause of alcohol-related aggression. So the effects of alcohol abuse in teenagers can also be particularly damaging as the brain is still developing. Teenagers who drink alcohol have abnormalities in brain structure, function, and behaviour compared to those who don't. So another effect of alcohol is the disruption of sleep patterns. Drinking in a large amount of alcohol before bed is associated with poor sleep quality, which can lead to chronic sleep deprivation, which we know is a big risk factor for many chronic conditions, including Alzheimer's disease. So overall, you should avoid excessive alcohol consumption at any age, but especially if you're a teenager or a young adult, and avoid binge drinking entirely. So seventh is fish high in mercury. So mercury is a heavy metal contaminant and neurological poison that can be stored for a long time in animal tissues. So long-lived predatory fish are particularly susceptible to accumulating mercury and can carry amounts of 1 million times the concentration of their surrounding water. So for this reason, the primary food source of mercury in humans is seafood, particularly wild varieties. So after a person ingests mercury, it spreads all around their body, concentrating in the brain, liver, and kidneys. And in pregnant women, it also concentrates in the placenta and fetus. So the effects of mercury toxicity include disruption of the central nervous system and neurotransmitters and stimulation of neurotoxins, resulting in damage to the brain. So for developing fetuses and young children, mercury can disrupt brain development and cause the destruction of cell components. And this can lead to cerebral palsy and other developmental delays and deficits. However, most fish are not a significant source of mercury. In fact, fish is a high-quality protein and contains many important nutrients such as omega-3s, vitamin B12, zinc, iron, and magnesium. So it's important to include fish as part of a healthy diet. Generally, it's recommended that adults eat 2 to 3 servings of fatty fish per week, like salmon, mackerel, and sardines. So you can see that your diet definitely has a big impact on your brain health. Diets that are high in sugar, refined carbs, unhealthy fats, and processed foods can contribute to impaired memory and learning, as well as increase your risk of diseases such as Alzheimer's and dementia. And several other substances in food are dangerous for your brain too. Alcohol can cause massive damage to the brain when consumed in large quantities, while mercury found in seafood can be neurotoxic and permanently damage developing brains. However, this doesn't mean you must avoid all these foods completely. In fact, some foods, like fish, also have health benefits. One of the best things you can do for your brain is to follow a diet rich in healthy, fresh, whole foods. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I want to give you our free brain healthy food guide, which contains 20 of the best brain foods that will boost your memory, mood, and thinking. You can grab this free guide at ologyonlinecourses.com/brainfoods. That's ologyonlinecourses.com/brainfoods. So thanks so much for joining me for today's episode on the worst foods for your brain health. I hope it was helpful, and here's to your brain health and well-being, and I will look forward to seeing you next time.